Okay, let's get started. Now, I want to just remind you that we did something a little weird last week. And after finishing chapter 13, we presented a theory that is actually not mine. It was presented in an article by someone named Yosef Goel Didi, who I have no idea who he is. But he talks about how the actual chronology of these chapters that we've been doing is a little different. And the effect of it is that it takes chapter 11 and puts it towards the end of the story, so that the battle that we are now in the middle of, a battle in which Saul and afterwards Jonathan engages with the Philistines, is something that actually happens at the very beginning of Saul's kingdom. It's in the first year, and we saw that also. It was much easier than to reconcile what happens when Saul goes to the Gilgal. He's waiting for Samuel, and because the people are threatening to leave, and he needs them for battle, he brings the sacrifices before Samuel comes. And then when Samuel comes, he's very angry, and he basically says, you're going to lose the kingdom. Okay, and that we saw in chapter 13. And I think keeping that in mind also makes it easier to understand what's going to be going on here in chapter 14. Okay, so chapter 14, we are now in this war with the Philistines. And basically what's happening here is we have two different locations. Jonathan goes off with a servant or an aide or whatever you might call him. He's in one place. And Saul, with his army, is somewhere else. And we're going to see a problem happening because they're in two different places. So let's start reading. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the attendant who carried his arms, "Come, let us cross over to the Philistine garrison on the other side." But he did not tell his father. What we're seeing here is that Jonathan is taking initiative on his own. It's kind of like, I wouldn't call it guerrilla warfare, but it's definitely unconventional. It's definitely the kind of warfare that would be by nature done by, let's say, special agents, or something like that. But whereas in most battles, let's say if we think of military activities today, in Israel, for example, you have the IDF, you have the commander-in-chief, and there's all these different bodies under the command. So there's going to be these regular infantry soldiers, you're going to have the Air Force, and you're also going to have all these Secret Service kind of people, some of which are undercover, and they penetrate the enemy and then goes in coordination with the regular infantry. Here we have a situation where Jonathan is going in on his own, maybe undercover and maybe not. I mean, we'll see exactly how he does that. But by the same token, it's not at all in coordination with the army. Saul's running one operation, Jonathan's running another, and neither of them know about the other, which is very, very problematic, okay? And you have to understand, and this last words of verse 1, he did not tell his father. That already should set up some red lights. What would have been the big deal to tell his father? He should have like a little war huddle, okay? You stay with the army, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to go from the side, I'm going to go here. Why didn't he tell his father? Okay, so let's keep that question in mind. Verse 2. Now Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah, under the pomegranate tree of Migron. That's fabulous because all these places are places in Israel today. Gibeah, there's a place called Geva Binyamin. The Gibeah of Benjamin is probably the same place. Migron was the name of a small, unofficial, illegal neighborhood that unfortunately was moved somewhere else, but it's very much in the same area, just north of Jerusalem. And the troops with him numbered about 600. Achiah, son of Achitub, brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the priest of the Lord at Shiloh, was there wearing an ephod. Now, the ephod is that breastplate that has the stones with the different tribes, but it's also a vehicle by which God can communicate with the nation by different stones lighting up. And this is, we saw this, for example, at the end of the book of Judges, when it's actually Phinehas, which is very interesting here because this is descendants of Phinehas who now carry the breastplate. And at the end of the book of Judges, in their terrible civil war, when they go and ask God, and they want direction. How should they continue in the battle? It's going to Phinehas, who has that same breastplate, and they're getting his thing. So here we have, by the way, important information that will become interesting to us later as to who these people are, because Achia, Achitub, and some of the relatives are going to show up again later with David, and so this gives us a sense of their lineage. So that's important. And so he's with. So we have here a priest. That's the important point here. These extra details will serve us later, but what we need right here is the fact that there's a priest with them, because the priest is going to be a vehicle to consult with God later on. Now, the troops did not know that Jonathan had gone. So not only does his father not know, the troops don't know either. At the crossing by which Jonathan sought to reach the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on one side and another rocky crag on the other, the one called Bozez and the other Sneh. One crag was located on the north near Michmash and the other on the south near Geva. Okay, so basically he puts himself in this crevice between these two big boulders, and he can see the Philistines, but they can't see him. So now he's making a plan. Jonathan said to the attendant who carried his arms, "Come, let us cross over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows." Okay, now how do they refer to the Philistines? Arelim, they're uncircumcised. It creates a distance. These are people that they're not us, they have nothing to do with us. We need to get rid of them. And you'll recall last week we read the scriptures in the previous chapters that talk about how persecuting, how oppressive these Philistines were to the Israelites at this time. And he says as follows: "Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf, for nothing prevents the Lord from winning a victory by many or a few." So very important, the way he turns to his aid, he's not saying, I'm a prince, I'm the second in command, I don't know what, therefore this is what you need to do. He's making a suggestion. He says, well, what do you say? Let's do this, okay? And of course, he puts forward this idea. He says, well, maybe God will help us through this. I mean, there are two people against an entire Philistine camp. It sounds a little crazy, okay? But he's giving this offer to his aide, and the aide said, yeah, sure. His arms spread out, said, do whatever you like, you go first. I am with you, whatever you decide. So you see, there's, on the one hand, he's not commanding him. It's not like a soldier general kind of relationship. It seems more like a partnership kind of relationship where he's offering him, you want to do this? And he says, yeah, I trust you, let's do it. Jonathan said, we'll cross over to those men and let them see us. If they say to us, wait until we get to you, then we'll stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord is delivering into their hands. That shall be our sign. So Jonathan here is really, using this idea of a sign. And we see this happens many times in the Bible. And sometimes it's legitimate and sometimes it isn't. And of course, the only way you know it's legitimate is the extent to which God actually responds. But what Jonathan is basically saying is, this is the sign, okay? Depending on what they say. It's interesting, for example, one of the first places we see this kind of a discussion is Eliezer, for example, Abraham's servant, when he's going to look for a bride for Isaac, and he's about he's approaching, he sees these women, he has his camels to feed, there's water there. And what does he say? He says, if the woman if she says to me, I will bring you water and I will also bring water to your camels, that's the right person. So there you can say, okay, that might be a sign. In other words, he's setting a sign. If God makes this happen, if she says the exact right thing, it's a sign from God. On the other hand, you could say, well, that's worthy. He's looking for a woman who has certain characteristics, who has certain type of character, and that's what he's looking for. And that would be an indication that she is a very considerate person. So in that place, you can see it running both ways. Here also, the question is, does this logically tell, is it only just a kind of random kind of condition that, based upon what happens, it's almost as if it's a direct sign from God? Or is there some kind of internal logic to it? And I do believe there's also an internal logic. Because what's the difference? He says, if they show themselves and the Philistines see them, he says, no, don't come any closer. Then you see already that there's a relationship of hostility. On the other hand, if they say, come on up, okay, then it tells them that the Philistines don't suspect them of being dangerous. Okay, so you can see also not just that this is a sign from God, but there's a certain inherent logic to the way he puts forward this condition, this sign. So they showed themselves to the Philistines' outposts, and the Philistines said, look, some Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have been hiding. Okay, so you can see by the way the Philistines are saying it, what is their assumption? Oh, those Israelites, they're a bunch of sissies. All they've been doing is hiding. They're not a real army. They're not looking to fight us. So here we have a couple people that are finally showing their faces. Their assumption is they're coming to surrender. They're coming out of hiding. They're surrendering. You're coming out of hiding. You don't come on the ambush. Okay. And so it all fits with this idea that there's an inherent logic to the conversation as well. So the men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his arms bearer, come up to us. We'll teach you a lesson. Then Jonathan said to his arms bearer, follow me, for the Lord will deliver them into the hands of Israel. But Jonathan sees this not just as inherent logic, but clearly also a sign from God as he set it up that God will be with him. So he goes forward. Now, how does he do this? Jonathan clambered up on his hands and feet, his arms bearer behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, his arms bearer finished them off behind him. In other words, he's crawling up as if he's coming to them as in surrender, but as he approaches each Philistine, he's killing them. And the guy behind him is doing the same. So basically, he's coming on his hands and knees, one by one, and killing them, okay, because he's caught them unawares, because they're assuming he's coming to surrender. And you can picture this coming on hands and knees as reinforcing that. Okay, you know, we're nervous, we're crawling, we're in defeat. Okay, so he's using this, he's creating this impression, which of course serves him, and then he's able to slaughter them. Okay, the initial attack that Jonathan, his arms bearer, made accounted for some 20 men. So they killed 20 people this way, within a space of about half a furrow long and an acre of land. Terror broke out among all the troops, both in the camp and in the field. The outposts and the raiders were also terrified. The very earth quaked, and a terror from God ensued. Okay, so he only killed 20 men, but he did this in such a small area and in such a small space of time that basically what it did is it created fear and panic amongst the Philistines. Okay, now we moved to another camp. Okay, until now we had Jonathan, who's near Michmash. Now we have another place. Now we're back to Saul. Saul's scouts in Gibeah, Benjamin, saw that the multitude was scattering in all directions. He sees the Philistines running. He doesn't know, he has no idea what Jonathan has done. He can't see it because Jonathan is crawling and killing 20 people within a furrow. Okay, so Saul can't see it. What can he see? That the Philistines are scattering. Saul said to the troops with him, take account and see who has left us. They took account and found that Jonathan and his arms bearer were missing. Okay, so here we know, Saul knows that Jonathan is not there. He does not know that Jonathan was on this mission that caused what he saw, but he knows that he's not there. Thereupon Saul said to Achiab, bring the ark of God here, for the ark of God was at the time amongst the Israelites. But while Saul was speaking to the priest, the confusion in the Philistine camp kept increasing, and Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Saul and the troops with him assembled and rushed into battle. They found the Philistines in very great confusion, every man's sword turned against his fellow. And here's a very interesting scripture. And the Hebrews who had previously sided with the Philistines, who had come up with them in the army from round about, they too joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. What is that about? Well, you know what? This happens a lot, unfortunately. You have a situation where you have the Philistines who are essentially an occupying power. They're oppressing the Israelites, they're an occupying power. And you have Israelites who are saying, you know what? Israelites are never going to come out ahead of this. At least if we come to the Philistines and we say, we're with you, we'll have an easier time of it because they'll pull us out of the position of being the oppressed and they'll make us one of theirs. And so clearly we're seeing that this had happened. So that also is an indication of an incredibly serious problem in the Israelite camp. Remember now that this is part of the situation, especially when we read last week, the situation where the Philistines had seized all the metal and metal sharpening instruments, so that somebody who wanted a plow had to go and bring their plow to be sharpened at the Philistines. And it was very, very rigidly controlled. And it's such an extreme indication of oppression, okay? And it caused many people to starve because of the Philistines saying, no, you can't sharpen your plow today. Then they couldn't harvest their wheat. It was a terrible situation. And there was we knew this already from last week's chapter, there's great distress and there's great despair. And that's one of the reasons that the nation has gone to Samuel and say, we need a king, okay? But what we're seeing here, that it's even worse, because we're seeing here that there are people within the Israelite nation that have defected to the other side. And there's nothing more demoralizing to a people to see people defecting and joining the enemy. But that's clearly, we don't have it told to us in real time, so to speak. We have it almost as a by the by here, because what we're seeing is because of the disarray in the Philistine camp, these Hebrews who had sided with the Philistines switched sides. And they basically said, you know what? Hope is not lost. We can now go back to our own people. And it's a little by the by, but it is very, very indicative. When all the men of Israel who were hiding in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too pursued them in battle. Thus the Lord brought victory to Israel that day. Okay, so it's a great battle. And, so basically you have something that starts with Jonathan, and then the soldiers come in and chase and defeat the Philistines. They don't even know how it is, or at least at this point, they don't seem to know how it is that the Philistines start to run away. What puts them in such disarray? We know, and they will know later, we know that it's because of Jonathan's initial tactic. Okay, the fighting passed beyond Beit Aven. The men of Israel were distressed that day. Now here starts a whole story, and this will take us through to the end of this chapter. It's an extremely odd story, okay? Saul had laid an oath upon the troops. Cursed be the man who eats any food before night falls, and I take revenge on my enemies. Okay, what is he saying? He puts out an oath, a decree. And it's not just a decree, you're not allowed to eat until we finish the battle, but it comes with an oath, which is, if you do eat, okay, you will be cursed. Cursed meaning put to death, okay? Reminds us a different kind of situation. Reminds us that these oaths are not good, okay? But it seems to be something that these military generals and leaders like Jephthah. Remember Jephthah? He's about to go into battle, and he gives this a different kind of oath, because in that case the oath has to do with offering something as a sacrifice in thanks to God upon his victory. So what does he say? The first thing, or the first whatever, who comes out of my house, I will sacrifice. In both cases, Saul and Jephthah make this general oath, and in both cases, who are the people that are the target of this oath, unbeknownst to the father? In Jephthah's case, it's his daughter. In Saul's case, it's his son, Jonathan. Now let's see how the story proceeds. So none of the troops ate anything. Everybody came, and the whole everybody came to a stack of beehives, or another way of saying would be to a field or to a forest, where there was honey all across the field. Okay, exactly how this honey got there, the English makes it sound more logical. The Hebrew is actually not as clear. The Hebrew is that everybody came to a forest, and there was honey across the entire field. So how does a field become covered with honey? So the English says, well, there are beehives there. That could be, but whatever it is, you have all this honey on the ground. When the troops came to the field and found the flow of honey there, no one put his hand to his mouth, for the troops feared the oath. And they didn't dip their fingers into the honey and lick it, the little sustenance, because they had heard this oath. Jonathan, however, had not heard his father adjure the troops. What do we learn here? Jonathan has now rejoined the group. But we know that at the point at which there was a point before that Saul knew that Jonathan was missing. We know that Jonathan came back to the troops because he's here now, but he clearly wasn't there when Saul made that oath. It says here, Jonathan, however, had not heard his father adjure the troops. So he put out the stick he had with him, dipped it into the honey, and brought his hand back to his mouth, and his eyes lit up. He got a bit of sweet. Wow, this is great. At this, one of the soldiers spoke up. Your father adjured the troops. Cursed be the man who eats anything this day. And so the troops are faint. It could be faint, it could be tired, it could be famished. Okay, so basically we're talking about a situation where they're in the middle of battle, and Saul is saying you cannot eat until we defeat the enemies. Now, actually, this guy who's telling Jonathan what his father had said is a little bit changing what he said, because Saul had actually said until we defeat the enemies, whereas he said nothing this day. In Saul's message, it's clear what Saul's reasoning is. He's worried that for whatever reason, if they eat, it will affect their victory. If they get too distracted, if they stop to eat, they need to be continuing on until victory without any interruptions. Okay, whereas this guy, the way he reports the oath to Jonathan, he's saying it in a different way. Nobody can eat today. So it sounds, in a way, very without any reason. It's just random. Okay, and we learned here that so the troops are faint. He's saying, you see, now everybody's really tired. So what does Jonathan say? He says, my father's brought trouble on the people. He criticizes Saul for this oath. Now, this is very serious. Saul is the king. Saul made an oath. You can say you don't like it, but you don't, especially if you're the king's son, you're the prince. You don't publicly say, oh, my father did it. He didn't know what he's talking about. That's a stupid thing to say. Okay, see for yourselves how my eyes lit up when I tasted that bit of honey. If only the troops had eaten today of spoil captured from the enemy, the defeat of the Philistines would have been greater still. My goodness, he not only is criticizing his father, but he's saying this very oath that his father put out has made the situation worse, because if the troops were not hungry, they would have done a better job. But what this says to us also is that Jonathan here has, we saw before the way he talks to his aide. He's not talking as a commander to someone, he's talking as an equal. Here too, when he talks to these people, he's talking about his father as an equal. He's a very democratic kind of guy. I'm not sure that kind of democracy is appropriate in a battle. You need hierarchy. There's a king, there's a general, there's orders, they get listened to. So in that sense, I would say there's something very problematic about Jonathan's attitude and the way he's speaking. On the other hand, what Jonathan is saying makes a lot of sense. They're hungry, and we see two different times. We see here in verse 28, it says that they are tired. And again, we see in verse 31 that the nation is tired. That the Bible is telling us. So there's something in the Bible itself that is giving credence to what Jonathan is saying. Yes, you know what, Jonathan makes a point. And twice the Bible is telling us, yes, the nation is tired. Now you could say that in verse 28, it's possible that this man who is telling the oath to Jonathan is the one who's saying the troops are faint, the nation is faint, or it's possible that it is the narrator, it is the Bible itself who's telling us this. That's not clear, but in verse 31, it is very clear. This is the objective statement of the Bible itself. This is God telling us the nation is tired. Okay, so there's here a problem. You see, it's a complicated problem. On the one hand, there seems to be a problem in the relationship between Saul and Jonathan, and we don't have the proper authority that we probably should have in this situation. Jonathan didn't tell Saul. Saul doesn't know where he is. Jonathan's criticizing his father. There's a hierarchy problem here. But by the same token, there's clearly, by the scripture telling us twice that the nation is so tired, there's a criticism of Saul's oath to begin with. It seems a little silly. It's also very strict. It's not saying, okay, guys, let's hold off for now. We'll eat soon. Let's just get through this battle. It's putting it as an oath that says, and if you eat, you're going to be killed. That's a whole different ballgame. All right, let's continue. We're going to go back to exactly what that means. They struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ayalon. The troops were famished. Okay, they're tired, famished, whatever. The troops pounced on the spoil. They took the sheep and cows and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the troops ate with the blood. What's happening here? It's like a free-for-all. They're eating blood. You're not allowed to eat the blood. And it's a complete and total free-for-all. And it seems to be influenced by Jonathan saying, oh, that's a stupid decree. Okay, so as soon as they struck them down, they just pounce on that. So in that sense, it may give credence to Saul's, it could be that Saul knew his people and knew that if he doesn't put it here with a very absolute decree, you don't eat or else you're going to be killed, maybe that was the only way to keep them in order. It could also be that if with such an extreme decree, they broke loose and went to the other extreme. So whatever it is, it's clearly a problematic situation there. When it was reported to Saul that the troops were sinning against the Lord, eating with the blood, he said, you have acted faithlessly. Roll a large stone over to me today. And Saul ordered, spread out among the troops and tell them that everyone must bring me his ox or a sheep and slaughter it here and then eat. You must not sin against the Lord and eat with the blood. So he kind of brings them back into order now. Every one of the troops brought his own ox with him that night and slaughtered it there. Thus Saul set up an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar he erected to the Lord. So he brings them back into order. They do a proper slaughter. It's also part of an altar, part of a sacrifice kind of situation. And that kind of redeems the situation. But through this story, we're seeing already holes, both in the way Saul's behaving and the way Jonathan is behaving. And of course, this is now going to come to a head. Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder among them until the light of morning. Let us not leave a single survivor among them. Do whatever you please, they replied. But the priest said, let us approach God here. So Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hands of Israel? But this time he did not respond. Okay, God didn't respond. That means that God is probably unhappy with some aspect of what's going on here. Okay, then Saul said, come forward, all chief officers of the troop, to find out how this guilt was incurred today. So he understands because God has not responded to him, somebody sinned, and he is going to figure out who it is. And he goes through a system of a lottery. We saw the very same system earlier, and particularly we saw it in Joshua to find out who was the one who sinned after the battle of Jericho. And we've seen this kind of lottery in other places as well. We saw it even with the appointment of Saul. They did some kind of lottery to find Benjamin, and then they find the family, and then they find Saul. So it's seen as a divine appointment, this kind of lottery. So basically what Saul is saying, if I'm not going to get the answer through the breastplate of the priest, I'm going to try a lottery that will give me an answer. Okay, and he goes through this whole thing, but and what does he say? Come forward, all chief officers of the troops, and find out how this guilt was incurred today. For as the Lord lives, who brings victory to Israel, even if it was through my son Jonathan, he shall be put to death. Okay, so he doesn't know it's Jonathan, but he's saying that he's being so rigid, so black and white. It reminds us of Jephthah. Doesn't matter who it is, even if it's my own son, he's going to be put to death. This whole situation that he set up was so extreme and so problematic. Not one soldier answered him, and he said to all the Israelites, you stand on one side, and my son Jonathan, I shall stand on the other. The troops said to Saul, do as you please. Saul then said to the Lord, the God of Israel, show Tamim. Okay, it's kind of, it's not clear exactly what that word means, but he's asking him, show us. Some people say Tamim is like Tumim. In Hebrew, the breastplate is the Urim v'Tumim, so it could be referring to that. But whatever it is, he is asking for God to give a clear answer. Jonathan and Saul were indicated by lot, and the troops were cleared. And then Saul said, cast the lots between my son and me, and Jonathan was indicated. Saul said to Jonathan, tell me, what have you done? And then Jonathan, of course, told him about the honey, and he says, I'm ready to die. He, by that time, he realized, he criticized the oath, but he realized that this might be the problem, and therefore he has to die. So what does Saul say? Thus in war may God do, you shall be put to death, Jonathan. What kind of father is this? You get a sense here that he has become king. And, when you're a leader, there are some people who are leaders and they are given enormous power and they think they need to keep more power. They have to be as strict as possible. They have the stronger and stricter they are, the more people will realize they're king or they're the leader. And then there's a wiser way sometimes to lead, where you're not aggressive, you're not putting power, but in the way you lead, it is clear you have the authority and people respect you. Saul is clearly here acting from a position of he has a lack of confidence in his own authority. And so he's doing these very extreme things as if to demonstrate, I am so powerful and I am so strong and I am so tough, I'm even willing to kill my own son. Okay. And I think, by the way, if we follow the approach that we discussed last week, that we say that this story is at the very beginning and that we know it's in any case right after he's essentially fired by Samuel. Okay. We know that from last week's chapter, but then he's in the middle of a battle and he goes forward with the battle. It's very possible that since he's in the middle of a battle, that Samuel just before the battle had said, you didn't wait for me, you did sin, well, go ahead in this battle, but this is it, you're not going to be king, that already erodes Saul's confidence in himself as a king. And it could also explain why Jonathan feels free to criticize Saul, because he also doesn't see him as such a king anymore after what Samuel had said. Okay, but what happens? The troops, though, answer back, the nation, and they say to Saul, shall Jonathan die after bringing this great victory to Israel? Never. As the Lord lives, not a hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he brought this day to pass with the help of God. Thus the troops saved Jonathan, and he did not die. That was the end of that. So you see here something, Saul gives in. He gives in very rapidly. And maybe it's also he has lack of confidence, but when the nation goes up against him, maybe there's something in him that says, you know what? I'm not such a good king these days anyway, so fine. If that's what they say, that's what they say. Saul broke off his pursuit of the Philistines. Philistines returned home. Okay? But here we have the next statement, which is very interesting. After we have a sense of all kinds of mistakes that Saul has made in exercising his authority, too tough, etc. But maybe this really is a turning point in his understanding of the limits of power, and that the way to, in other words, the fact that he gives in here to his people may be an indication of his greatest strength. Okay, he understands that more power, not necessarily the answer. There are times when you do listen to the wisdom of the people and you don't act like a dictator. And what happens right after that? Saul secured his kingship over Israel, he waged war on every side. And we see about all these different battles that he is successful with. Okay. And then we have a list of the family of Saul, all these different people that will show up later on. There was bitter war against the Philistines all the days of Saul, and whenever Saul noticed any stalwart man of war, he would take him into his service. So we already here have the sense of the beginning of a change, okay? And if we follow the pattern that we talked about last week, here's the beginning of the change, but he kind of goes home and and then the people from Yavesh Gilad have problems, and they call him and they take him from behind the ox, and he comes back and he really becomes king. And it's very possible that this verse 47 to the end really is said already after he has, or in the middle of his next battles, not right after the battle of the Philistines. If we say that the Philistines was the first battle, if we say that it's, a later battle, then in any case, we see that there's a maturity that happens to Saul here. Okay, there's a certain sense that he realizes the limits of power. Okay, but what we do see throughout this whole story, and what we've seen in the last few chapters, we've already sown the seeds for Saul's downfall. We've seen definite problems in his character. We see definite talents that he has, but also definite problems. And when we move on next week to chapter 15, we're going to see the biggest problem that's going to come light. Okay, so that's it for today. Anybody have any questions or comments? Turn on your mics.
I've been thinking about the soldiers on the battlefield. They didn't wear fatigues and military clothing like we know it today. I mean, there were no pockets to carry a sandwich, or a power bar or something. I think if Saul said don't eat, he meant don't leave the battle, don't go back to the camp where the food was being prepared. And so it was turned around on him because Jonathan was already disrespectful. Jonathan may have been using that as a wedge to show that his father was not honorable, or, there was probably some family dynamics going on there that Jonathan could turn Saul's words around and use it.
Jonathan didn't know what Saul had said.
No,
Jonathan, until afterwards,
but he misconstrued the words. He made it sound much worse than it.
Right, but part of it begins with that fellow who's the one who actually communicates the oath to Jonathan, who says, you just can't eat it all today. Whereas what Saul said is, we cannot eat until we have a victory.
You can't leave the battle and go back to camp and make a meal.
I don't know if it's going back to camp, because what we see afterwards is there are two different opportunities to eat. One is they come upon this field of honey, and another is the spoils from the opposing camp. So I don't think in any case they're talking about going back to their own camp. What they're talking about, as they're moving in battle, there are opportunities to grab something to eat, either in the enemy camp as part of the spoils, or the honey. Okay, so it's very possible if, first of all, Saul turning this into an oath was very problematic. It's very possible if Saul had said, we're moving forward in the battle, we cannot afford any interruption, so no stopping and grilling meat. Okay, maybe if he would have left an option for grabbing a snack, like picking a lick of the honey or grabbing a piece of bread that they may have seen at the enemy camp, then that would have been an option. But then the response of the people who, after they see Jonathan grab the animals and eat them with the blood in a very animal kind of way, may have, and this is what we were saying, may have indicated that Saul really understood his people better, and that he had to be extreme. Yeah. Otherwise, they would, they would know how to be moderate. They would be extreme. That leaves the question open.
Yeah, previously to this chapter, was there something between Saul and Jonathan that was causing strife?
No, okay. We don't really know Jonathan before this. This is our first meeting with Jonathan.
Oh, I didn't realize that. All right, thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, Sondra, yes, I heard you say at the beginning, I think, that the ephod, that they lit up, a stone would light up. I hadn't heard that before.
Well, that is our tradition. Because it goes back to even in Exodus, when the tabernacle and all the vestments of the priests are described, and there's the different stones for the different tribes, but that is the tradition, and the tradition comes from an interpretation of how this ephod is then seen in the book of Judges and here in Samuel, that there is some kind of communication going on via the ephod, and that's the interpretation.
Interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Well, this was great. Now, I will not be teaching next week, because next week we're going, my whole family, up to the north. Next week is the 14th. I will be teaching on the 21st, and I will be teaching on the 28th. Those will be the last two classes before I take a break. And as I mentioned earlier, in those two classes, we will be doing chapter 15 next in 2 weeks, and chapter 16 the week after that. And that will take us to, let's see, no, we're going to do 15 next week, and 16, okay, the week after. So that will take us through the original finding of David, okay? So we're going to be stopping at the point that there's a problem with Saul. There's going to be already a selection of David, but then all that comes afterwards and all the issues of David, that's what we're going to start after we come back from the break in the middle of October. Okay, so now no class next week. After that, 2 more classes, and then we break until the middle of October. Okay?
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at cfoic.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage.
I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.